Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural event in our Entrepreneurship and Impact series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mavrck. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Mathematics, and before I took on the role of Dean in 2020, I was the Director of Sheraton School of Computer Science, and before that, I was a professor for a long time in the school. And it's always a special pleasure to welcome back alumni, especially former students like our speaker, Ian MacKinnon, whose time in computer science actually overlapped with mine. And apparently we served on a committee where we basically, that was the time where we introduced SCHEME into the first year programs and kind of did a major overturning of some of the curriculum that still lives on today. So I guess I'm proud of that. But before we go further, I'd like to take a serious moment to acknowledge that much of our work takes place on the traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. Our main campus is situated on the Haldeman Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across all our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is centralized within the Office of Indigenous Relations. So, our new Entrepreneurship and Impact series brings experienced, successful entrepreneurs to the University of Waterloo to share their stories and inspire our students. Once a month, inspiring speakers like Ian here will share their experiences and practical advice about how they turned a background in mathematics and computer science into successful startups, innovative products, and exciting careers. After the speakers share their expertise, each event will feature a networking session with refreshments and space for you to meet fellow students and faculty with similar interests and goals. The purpose of this series is to allow you to get up close and personal with industry leaders and ask them your burning questions. With that in mind, today's event will be in the Ask Me Anything style. Whether you're looking for specific advice or just curious about what our speaker's everyday routine looks like, we encourage you to feel comfortable asking questions. Our moderators are Stephanie Whitney, and the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship in the Faculty of Math and Math Innovation, and Charlie Clark, the Math Associate Dean Innovation. Tempted to aim a laser pointer at him over there. That could be dangerous. He's there ready to law. If you guys don't step up with really good questions, he's back there, but don't rely on him. Anyway, they have a list of questions already submitted by audience members, but we'll be taking live questions as well from you. With those logistics out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker in our Entrepreneurship and Impact series, Ian MacKinnon. Ian's a graduate of the University of Waterloo, receiving his BMath CS in 2006 and his Masters of Math in 2008. He has experience working throughout the industry, including at SAP and Google, and he is most well known, however, as the founder and CTO of Later.com. Later was founded in 2014 at a hackathon and has since grown to become a leading social media and visual marketing platform with over 5 million of the world's top brands and agencies as users. Last year, Later was acquired by Mavrck, a global player in the marketing space. Today, Ian continues his responsibilities as CTO, overseeing the engineering team and its software development efforts, as well as spearheading its machine learning and data science initiatives. So, we really can't wait to hear about your journey, Ian, and the insights you've gained along the way. Thanks for speaking with us today.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you for joining us.
First of all, thank you all for coming. I know how busy things can get. Just show of hands for my own. How many saw that freaking TikTok I posted on the Waterloo Math Instagram feed? And a few? Okay, not many. Okay, a few did, because I put that out there, and seriously, if one 20-year-old typed cringe as a response to it, I could never show my face in public ever again. Because what I had to love about the Waterloo Math Instagram page that day, there was like Professor Jimmy Lin getting some award, then my 40-year-old ass doing TikTok memes, and like that was the feed one day. So anyway, thanks for coming. We're going to do the Ask Me Anything portion a little bit. I just thought I would kind of give a little overview. Like there tends to be some frequently asked things about startups. I'm assuming everyone here has at least a passing interest in entrepreneurship or startups. I was just going to cut through some of that and get some of the basics out of the way. First, about me. Like I said, I did my undergrad and grad computer science here. I did a lot of extracurriculars while I was here. I was a math news editor, an orientation director. When I was a grad student, I was GSA president. Let us say I bleed pink, and I have for a long time. I did co-ops with the CS Instructional Support Group, the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics, managing expectations. I worked in the IT department there, so that's kind of the intellectual equivalent of being a water boy to those people. But, you know, interesting experience. And of course, Google, which we're going to talk a little bit about and what that's like. And then I moved to Vancouver after graduating, because why not? The Olympics were about to happen. And then I just kind of never left. You know how it goes. You marry a local, you start a few companies, and before you know it, you're there with a mortgage. So I did always wanted to do startups. I was a teenager doing the .com days, and I started school just as all of that was collapsing. Turns out that's a great time to start an academic career, so in case anyone has, you know, read news the past week, it's a great time to be in school, similarly. But I always like the idea of kind of being your own boss, doing your own thing, have an outsized impact on the world. I went to grad school kind of counterintuitively, but I actually found a lot of what I picked up in grad school is useful to the startup world once you kind of just pivot on it. So, like I said, Later was founded at a hackathon. This is a photo from said hackathon. That was not the first app I made. I have launched some turds onto the App Store. We won't need to go through all of them, but there are some things I should rightfully be embarrassed about. But eventually, Later did go on to be a pretty successful company. We raised about $1.5 million in seed funding in 2015, expanded to other platforms, became an Instagram partner, and then like Mark said, we eventually got acquired by Mavrck. Unfortunately, they couldn't acquire more vowels, so, you know. That was one of my co-founders, and that's Lyle, the new CEO of the whole thing. So, how I'm going to structure this, I have a few kind of big tips, and we'll drill down on them. I'm trying to get through this in about half hour, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So big tip number one, FANG is not the beginning and end of career success. Okay, I was waiting for some boos. Good to know we got the right crowd. I feel like this whole Cali or bust thing is not new, not innovative, is nothing that you folk have come up with in the past few years. It has always been there. And I know that there's a lot of, there's nothing wrong with these companies, but there is. We'll talk about that. But I think you should consider being a founder. The first reason why is that you can avoid the gifted student to mediocre FANG employee pipeline. The reason I talk like this about FANG is, in a lot of cases, computer science majors and engineers don't really learn how to make product when you go to these companies. You are a small cog in a much larger machine, and you're not going to understand how things work. We've tried to hire people from a lot of FANG companies, very smart, very good at microservices and specific things, but you kind of lose that connection to building product. And here's the other little secret. You will be older than 25 at some point in your life. You can still work for a FANG company and apply to them after you are 25. I think a lot of people assume if I don't work there right away, that is it. I never get to do that. I wish that were the case, because then I wouldn't have FANG recruiters trying to steal my employees. Trust me, you can be 40 years old and work at FANG. It's not like you have one choice or one chance. Other big reason, co-op grants you a unique opportunity. You're exposed to problems, which I'm sure if you've looked at any kind of startup talks, you'll see you don't focus on the problem. In co-op, you get exposed to what some of those problems are. Also, it kind of keeps your debt load in check. I know student debts are rising, but co-op keeps it a little bit on there, so you might be able to take a little more risk. Also, it's somewhat important. I hope you all get a bad boss at some point in your co-op terms. It is extremely important in your career to have a boss you do not like, for no other reason than if you become a boss, you can then learn what not to do. And there are just certain things you will not really appreciate until it happens to you. The other thing is that you have a high level of risk tolerance right now. I say this, a lot of people wonder, does age matter with startups? And the answer, of course, with many things is sort of. You probably have no dependents. You can move on a whim. It's okay if you are 25 broke and have nothing to show for it. Most 25-year-olds are 25 broke and have nothing to show for it. It's okay if you make a startup and it goes nowhere. I've had failed startups. Do you know what happens? Nothing. Nothing. It is shocking if you fail at a startup how nobody cares except for you. It's a good time, you can have this risk tolerance that you're always going to have. Also, like, your life is not a mutual fund that needs to be perfectly hedged and risk minimized. You can roll some dice occasionally. Also, you can be that type of person. I think a lot of people have this idea of what a founder looks like and sounds like, and it's very heavily biased towards what you see coming out of Silicon Valley. And I'm standing here as a tall, hopefully charismatic guy. I understand I fit that mold. It's really important to me that you understand that does not have to be the case. I know some very weird and dorky founders who are extremely successful. But we'll talk about where that comes into play and where it doesn't. But I just want you to know that there's not an archetype for what a founder looks like. There's one that the media picks up on. Ultimately, it doesn't matter, because if your company is good, it doesn't matter what you are. You might have to convince some venture capitalists if you go down that route. It's a different game, but we'll come back to that. Pedigree shouldn't matter. I really wish I could say it doesn't matter where you go to school or who you are, you can stand on your own. I think we all know I'd be lying if I said that, but you're well set up for it if you are. Anyone know what Y Combinator is? Not the math thing, the startup thing? Yeah, I feel like that. The one audience where I have to worry about what people talk about. I don't know what that is. This is a list of schools where founders from Y Combinator went. They just published this, it's a big listing. Look where Waterloo sits. Right below Harvard, Berkeley, MIT, Stanford. We're beating 2 Ivies and Oxford. That is to say, a lot of Waterloo graduates have gone on. The Bay Area knows what Waterloo is. I've told that to anyone I've told that to in the Bay Area knows exactly what it is and have a very high opinion of it. So again, these are people they let into the Y Combinator program. So don't let this go to waste just because a meta person's marketing for recruitment convinced you, working for FANG is the only way to go. All right. Moving along to more important things. Big tip number 2, get passionate about a problem, not your idea. Let's be honest, how many of you have a startup idea right now? I'm not gonna ask you what it is. How many of you actually have an idea? Okay, that's good. I'm gonna tell you right now, your idea is not gonna work, but I don't know anything about it, but here's what the little thing is. It's probably close to something that will. This happens a lot. You have an idea, it kind of sucks, but it's really close, and it exposes you to the kind of people who have a problem that's really close to it. This is why you need to be obsessed about a problem rather than an idea. And problems can come in all shapes and sizes. Just make sure they're not too contrived, but we'll come to that in a second. In general, your idea might be cool and grab some attention, but solving a problem is really what makes a product or a startup stick. The big one I say is, what couldn't be done 18 months ago? If your idea could be done 18 months ago, people might wonder, like, well, why hasn't it been done? It might have been not done successfully. The nice thing about being here at a research university is you have a lot of exposure to things that didn't exist 18 months ago. It's just easier to find opportunity doing things that weren't possible 18 months ago. Right now, the big thing is, of course, GPT and large language models. There is so much opportunity in that space right now because that didn't exist in like November. So you're going to see a whole bunch of companies coming up with that. We're looking at how to integrate it every possible way. So it's just easier to think about, like, hey, what hasn't been done recently? Also, sometimes it helps to have a contrarian opinion about whatever your problem is. In a lot of cases, this is something that comes from Peter Thiel, where he's like, what do you believe about your problem that nobody else gets or agrees with? What do the big incumbents not see that you do about your problem? Next thing, you want to validate your idea. This is the whole lean startup methodology. I won't go too deep into that, but one of the things that we did with, this is the first real piece of advice I got when I was in a startup incubator, is that when you tell someone your idea, whatever comes out of their mouth next isn't the real feedback. The real feedback is what happens after you ask for $5. If you have friends who like you and family who tolerate you, and you tell them your idea, they are going to say it's great because they don't want to crap on your dreams. This is not good. Anyone ever watch like Dragon's Den? I love that show for all the wrong reasons because I see so many entrepreneurs who are in this little bubble where everyone told them how great they are, and the first honest human they meet is Kevin O'Leary. Don't do that. Find real feedback from people who don't like you. Another trick sometimes people do is here's my idea, or like you show a product that and claim it's your competitors, so then people feel free to give you the honest and real feedback. Other thing we did with Google is you can arbitrage Google search versus ad demand. By which I mean, let's say you have an idea. One of the things you're going to have to come across is how do I get distribution for my product, service, whatever you're making. Google is the kind of like base way of doing that. Are people searching for something where you can give them a result that solves their problem? For us, it was like schedule Instagram. And back in 2014, there was a lot of people searching for that, but not a lot of demand for the ad space. So if you find searching something that a lot of people are, and you can kind of see what search volumes are on Google using their Google Trends, and there's not a really good answer that you can plug something into, you kind of have a tailwind that's really going to help you validate your idea. Also, don't keep it a secret. No, I'm sure you've heard this, but like, if you make someone sign an NDA to hear your idea, it just makes you really seem like a real noob in the startup world. No credible investor is going to sign that NDA for you. I've had people try to get me to do that, and like, why? I'm taking on liability to hear your idea. And the person who had it, it was like an event sharing app or something like that. If you get too obsessive about just keeping it a secret, it probably means that you haven't gotten any real feedback on it yet. And this is the big one. How much people care matters way more than how many people do. If you take one thing away from this talk, this is from Paul Graham, and he said this is kind of like, imagine this well, and you know, how many people and how deeply they care about something. We have something like the Altair Basic. Only a small number of people care about the basic programming language being on the Altair, but they care a whole lot about it. Whereas something like a pets site, like I have a dog. I don't really, how I shop for her dog food is not the biggest pain point in my life, but a lot of people do have pets. But then you do have things like Google where a lot of people care very deeply about it. For context here, does anyone know the company that made the Altair Basic, what they're called? Microsoft. And pets.com went away and boom. It's more important, if you have a small customer base that cares very deeply about your product, that is way more important than having a broad one. I think a lot of novice entrepreneurs try and get something that appeals to everybody. No, you need a target market. Because here's the thing. This might start with the Altair Basic. But if you do that well, it kind of positions you well to do the next thing. It's basically easier to go sideways than down. People are only going to care so much. It's better to find that. Something people like, ultimately, you need people who are fanatics about your product, especially if it's new. Like later was not a problem I had. I did not have I have so much content, I need to get to my Instagram feed, I need to manage it. This is something I heard from other people. There's only a small number of people who really cared about that, but they cared a lot. All right, probably my most controversial slide, shitty startup markets. These are ideas I'm going to kind of dissuade you from going anywhere near. First of all, anything involving bars or restaurants. I've heard so many ideas of like, I made a bar finder, that was my first one that like didn't go anywhere. People just don't care. The people who run these are not particularly tech savvy. They just care about bodies in. There's not as much space there as you think. Next, two-sided marketplaces. A lot of students want to try and make a two-sided marketplace for people to buy and sell things. That's really hard to get going. The caveat here is that if you have some kind of community ahead of creating a two-sided marketplace, you might be able to get this a little bit easier. You people are the worst customers to ever have. There is so much wrong with being a university student when it comes to being a customer. First of all, you're all broke and you're cheap. How many of you are actually paying for your own Netflix right now? Show of hands. How many of you are paying? That's better than I thought, but I'm seeing some of the staff here and you don't count. That's my point. When you're thinking about people who are your customers, think about how willing they are to part with money. If they are not willing to part with money, Also, university students churn at 25% per year. You're only a post-secondary student for 4 years, so it means 25% of your customers are churning every year. So I challenge you to find problems that you yourself do not have. Find ones that other businesses might have, because your problems are not real problems. I mean, when it comes to economic ones, I'm sure there's a whole lot there, but in terms of problems that software will solve for you, anything where you're competing on costs. I think a lot of novice entrepreneurs trying to find the cheap way of doing things. This usually is not a good way to go. And cryptocurrency. I was here 3 years ago, and Professor Stabila got really mad at me because I made reference to crypto, and that as a cryptographer, they were there first, and they're less scummy in general. Generally, the faculty who work in the cryptography department are way less sketchy. Like everyone I know who's sketchy went into cryptocurrency. So fortunately, this is a little bit dead. It's very much looking for a contrived solutions to problems. So I know it's hot right now. Fortunately, I think some of that's going away. I do think you folk need to give up on the whole crypto thing though, because what that means, if crypto referred to cryptographers rather than cryptocurrency, crypto bros referring to the faculty who are working in cryptography is a funny thought. It also means certain headlines like this are interpreted in a whole different way. Okay, big tip number three, a team needs to be aligned, smart, hardworking, and trusting. Your founding team, don't do it alone. It's hard and lonely. How many co-founders should you have? I get this question a lot. The correct answer is E. Because 2 is not enough, and 3 is too many. I did not come up with that. I've heard that sometime in my tenure at Waterloo. Do not attribute that to me, but it is E. Later, we had 4. That's not a good number of co-founders to have, because you do have a lot of people. It's great. You have a lot of things covered. But for decision making, it can lead to more a stalemate. So it's either 2 or 3, depending on how you want to round that. A lot of people wonder how I deal with founder drama. You kneecap so much founder drama with what's called reverse vesting and an operating agreement. Reverse vesting means you don't get all your stock in the company on day one. Everyone, including the founders, get it over with a 1-year cliff. You have to work 1 year to get anywhere, and then monthly up to 4 years. So many startups just give their founders, if there's 3 of us, we're splitting it evenly, and then what happens if one founder walks away? So this is where reverse vesting just gets rid of a lot of founder drama right off the top, because maybe a founder, is there for a year and then leaves, and they're only getting a quarter of what they would have gotten, and maybe that's fair. It kind of gives a nice basis for making sure everyone has the same level of involvement. Technical people can learn business skills a lot easier than business people can learn technical skills. Technical founders are hard to come by anywhere else in the world except right here. How many people would consider themselves non-technical? Oh, wow. Okay, that's even fewer than I would have thought. I thought there'd be a few business people. That's cool. If you are here for 4 years and have not met anyone that you would trust enough to be your technical founder who would do it for you, you must be really hard to be around. Look inward if you went to Waterloo and you don't know anyone who could be your technical co-founder. Elsewhere in the world, especially where I'm in Vancouver, everyone's biggest thing is, I want to get started, but I can't find a technical co-founder. You do need to have one. I've seen a lot of startup teams that also have 2 technical co-founders, and one kind of becomes the business one out of necessity, because one person's got to handle the emails, deal with the admin. You're way better as a founding team if everyone's technical or working on product, because you can learn the business skills, and also the business skills that they teach you in a lot of places, even here, don't really translate well to early stage startup development where you have to be super scrappy. Also, be careful tossing out the grandiose titles early on. If you have 4 people on your team and they all have a C-level title or a VP level title, you're kind of playing house. So just be careful about assigning responsibilities like that too early. They do kind of evolve. Also, your success is bounded by your team's ability. This goes for the early team and who you hire. If you're lucky, you might be in the situation where you're hiring staff. And then you have to decide what kind of manager you're going to be. In terms of being a manager, it requires a lot. This is what I'm saying. It's good to have had a bad manager before you become one yourself. It'll help you have a lot more empathy and helps you contribute to a positive work environment. Other thing to remember, founders are always way more committed to whatever you're doing than any early stage staff member is going to be. Like, I just put in way more hours that I would never expect my staff to do. Also, it's a lot easier to sort out the culture for what your team is going to be when on day 0, before you've hired anyone. Things like DEI are a lot easier on day 0 when you're planning for that right out the gate. Big tip number 4, ruthlessly prioritize product. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Please tell me I got that right, anyone who knows. Oh, thank God. After a while, it just kind of becomes DEI, and if I got that wrong, I would feel very bad. By which I mean, like, for example, my first hire on our engineering team was a woman. If you do that first, hiring others and having a more diverse staff becomes just so much easier, because I can say that we're a woman-friendly workplace in our literature, or I can make sure a woman is in every single job interview that we're hiring for our engineering team. One is, show versus tell. But you can just have a chance to plan all that out before you're a large company with a somewhat homogenous executive team. Product before company. A lot of people think to start, I'm like, well, I have to incorporate, I have to get a domain. No, you need to have a product. Later was a product for a year before we incorporated. You don't need to have business cards. I think a lot of business cards, I'm not even sure if anyone does those anymore. I've had so many over the years. I think in my career, and I'm 40, I've used 5 business cards as they were meant to be used that whole time, because, anyway. But it's fun, you get to do that stuff, and it gives you the feeling that you're progressing, that we're building a company, we're getting a domain. No, you need a product, and you need to sell to customers, and that's your laser focus, what you have to be on. There's a few things that matter an annoying amount. Security and privacy. If you're selling anything, they're going to get these security questionnaires. Privacy is taken very seriously, especially if you have any customers in Europe. You have to learn about this thing called GDPR and be in compliance with that. Another set of things that are just easier to deal with on day 0. User experience. There are a large number of software companies where their only real differentiator is a good UX. This is really important, and I think a lot of developers don't quite get this because we are used to CLIs. A developer is comfortable with a CLI, which is basically no UX. Normal people want a nice UX, so don't sleep on this. And also speed of deployment and iteration, going back to the whole lean startup cycle, you want things out there quickly. And this is the best piece of advice you're ever going to get about a product. If you are not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched it too late. Your product at first iteration is going to suck, and that is okay. Again, many turds launched on the App Store, and none of them always went anywhere. But let me tell you about something with products that suck. People don't tell each other about them. It's hard enough for word of mouth to work when it's something good. No one sits around and tells each other, oh, have you seen this horrible app I used today? It's the back button, and they forget about you. A lot of what you're going to have in this is in your own head. Sure.
So if the initial product is getting bad, like Google App Store.
Yeah. So the question is, what if I get a bunch of bad reviews in the Google App Store early on? Don't launch on the Google App Store too much early on. Like, get a beta list. And also, I think, and you can also just take it down and put it back up. When you have no traction, nothing really matters. So you can do little tricks like that. And also, get qualitative feedback and then quantitative feedback. This is to say, if you have it in a little beta version, you can show it to people before you start and get proper analytics. One piece of advice I would give to anyone is go on Udemy and take a product management class on your co-op term or something. Like, get an idea of how product is made, what it looks good. This is just something you have to have a good sense for what's a good product and what's not. Check Product Hunt daily, see what people are posting, but learn about this. This is a whole field that you're not going to get exposed to in a large FAANG company unless you are a product manager. Get comfortable with product, what's a good one, have opinions about them. That's an important thing that you're going to get if you work at a startup or you start your own or you even work at like a design shop. You're going to have more sense for how people use software. Big take number 5, a founder's happiness is inversely correlated to money raised. This isn't as necessary as you might think. I think a lot of people think we need to like make a pitch deck, go raise money. It doesn't always work that way. We raised 1.5 million. We didn't touch any of it. It was really nice to have this nice pocket of money. But from our investors, they were more useful just for networking and, I kind of liken like taking venture capital money as like a political marriage in Game of Thrones. Like you're aligning your house's interests and that can help you sometimes, but you're now into a bigger world. Accelerators, incubators are great for people who are new to startup. Velocity is the local one, I believe. I think there's like 3 others here or something to that effect nowadays. They're great for getting entrepreneurs started into this environment where you might not have the context, you might not have the connections initially, and that's fine. This is a great place to get started. IRAP, Shred, and other government sources are useful but unreliable. Time sucks. Shred is like my most hated thing I have to do. That's the scientific research. I don't know that acronym, but I'm okay knowing that, not knowing that one. It's the thing where you get tax credits for doing certain activities. You have to have a lot of documentation. You get it a year after you've expended it. Every Canadian startup has to deal with these, but just know that they're unreliable, their time sucks, but Shred is like so much money, I just have to. Like, there's a point where fiduciary duty comes into play where I can't just be like, no, that's boring, I don't want to do that. Venture capital is for very specific company profiles. And this is where I think a lot of people get hung up on, I need to raise a seed round, I need to have a Series A. If you can get paid for your product or service, you can also grow it that way, bootstrap it. We came pretty close to doing that. But once you take VC, you're making a proverbial deal with the devil, because you will have to have an exit where the company goes public or you sell to another one. Ultimately, you will need to give that VC their money back. When we were raising for later, the feedback we got from a lot of VCs was that we can see how you're a $100 million company, but not a $1 billion company. And I was like, I will take the 100 million right now, please. But this is just the risk portfolio that they have to deal with. They are not looking for a bunch of companies that are going to give them 2-3 times their money back. If they're putting out 10 investments, they're expecting 5 to go nowhere, 3 to 4 to kind of like do okay, but 1 or 2 make at least 10x the money, and that's how the economics of venture capital works. So if you're only going to return them 2 to 3x in the best case, but more safely, they want people swinging for the fences, and they might not work for the kind of company you want to create, and that's fine. I think there's a lot of hype whenever you hear companies raising a lot of money, but we did pretty well with one small raise. Also, traction trumps everything. The days where you can raise venture capital with a pitch deck are kind of gone. If you have a product that is showing some traction, you have users, you see growing monthly active users, it's a lot easier to get venture capital money. And actually, which brings me to my next bit, if you have something that's starting to go, venture capitalists will reach out to you. And that's where I have to warn that no is the sexiest word in venture capital. If you launch something on Product Hunt, if you have something with a little bit of traction and things are going well, you are going to get flooded with emails from VC associates. It's really nice. It's a good feeling. If you have that, you're like, oh, all these people are interested in us. What you have to learn about venture capitalist associates, they all have quotas for how many startups they need to talk to in a quarter. So they might just be talking to you to fill out your quarter or their quota for that quarter. And they might just be like talking to you because they have a competitive play in that space. So it's kind of cool and you feel real special, but no, there's that other side. If you say, no, we're not raising right now, but we'll contact you when we are, they're way more interested, because if you talk to the analyst and you mess it up, they're probably just going to tick no on some spreadsheet and not think about you again. If you say, no, we're not taking meetings right now, we're focused on it, it kind of generates a little buzz that you're like, everyone wants what they can't have. So if you say that to a venture capitalist, don't raise until you're ready, don't take meetings until you have a good pitch. You might hear about like some jackass who raised $40 million on a pitch deck. I guarantee you they've already had an exit, they know somebody. Normal people don't raise money like that. But those outliers tend to get a lot of headlines. So that's it. If you want to follow me on the socials, LinkedIn's probably the most appropriate. My TikTok is on there too. There's varying degrees of professionalism in my social stuff there, but you can follow me on there. Yeah, and that was all I was going to have.
Amazing. Thanks, Ian. So I'll kick off the questions with a couple from the list that was sent in before the event, and then we'll start looking around the room for real-time questions, if that works for everyone. Ian, you mentioned, you talked a little about skills and the application of math in real life. Can you elaborate a little more on the skills? Because I know you mentioned, there's no real archetype, but folks had questions around character traits and specific skills they should be looking to develop while at Waterloo.
Honestly, you're fine right now learning every bit of technical skill you can have. Now, like I said, learning the business skills is a lot easier than anything technical. Like, get really good at producing product. Have a side project. I know during school terms, you probably just don't have the time for it. But even if you have some little thing, doesn't have to be a full startup, like, get comfortable with the idea of putting product out there and people using it and failing on the side. I would say once you have that, but honestly, just getting really good at programming, learning the best practices for software development, assuming you're making a software-based company, those are very important skills to have. And in computer science, there's kind of this thing where you learn how to program, but not on a team necessarily that well. I think co-op gives a lot of help with that. Like, they're not going to teach you continuous integration and continuous deployment in, CS 146. That's not their job. That's how you learn to have a bunch of people committing together, running test suites all the time. Like, you're not really going to appreciate those things until you've pushed a bug out into production and you're getting complaints. So, other skills, just getting to know people. The network you develop at this school is paramount. You're never going to be in place with this many smart people working on similar things. And graduates from this place go on to do amazing things. So, get as many people on your LinkedIn now because they're going to be useful later on. And you can also, it's also nice to get a little professionally jealous of how some of your colleagues are doing because it's somewhat motivating.
Maybe just a follow-up question to that about networking, because that appeared in that list too. Do you have advice about what types of events? How do you develop that network?
Event networking, I don't ever think really works that well. You can get to know people, but listen, the networking you'll do at a hackathon is way better than anything you'll do at a meet and greet. Because you're all working together with something, you're working with people, you're trying them out. Later was founded at a hackathon. I don't recommend doing that. Because we all know each other before. I've seen people who are like, oh yeah, I met these 3 people and we're gonna make a company together that I met last week. And I'm like, you don't know if you like that. They could be assholes. I spend more times with my co-founders than I do my wife. So, and there was a long stretch of time where she was not my wife and we were trying that out. So, hackathons are a great place to do just everyone you meet here, like in your dorms. Like, networking here is just talking to ideas, coming to events like this, just to get to know people that you see over and over again. And maybe you will click with someone. They're like, oh, I have an interest in this vertical. I do too. What can we mess around with? Like, again, not every project you make necessarily has to be a venture-backed idea. Again, many stinkers on the App Store.
Hi.
Hi.
Have you heard of WeWork?
Yeah.
I've always been curious how, the founder was able to raise a lot of money and then do some nefarious things where, I think they paid him for trademarking his name.
The self-dealing, yeah.
Yeah, how do you, I'm just assuming if you know how someone can get away with this. When the venture capitalists be like, what are you doing with our money?
Great question.
Don't do that.
Okay, so the question is, how do you scam investors? No.
Yeah. Basically, yeah.
Okay, first of all, WeWork actually has, I'm not sure if any of you worked in a WeWork, they're a great product. If you ignore Adam Newman and everything that went around it, they're a nice office space. How he did it, and it started as a good idea where I need a co-working space. And I have been this, where I need to work, if just me and a co-founder, I get lonely. I want to see other people working. And it's great for that. But I don't want to have our own office space to manage it. But subleasing office space is not some crazy new business model. But he pitched it like it was a software company. And he was obviously very good at that. Some people have that ability to pitch. And ultimately, he just convinced one person from the SoftBank fund to give him money at a ridiculous valuation. But then what happened is that investor was then now committed, and they had to be in on the lie. that this was this was worthy of some ridiculous multiple for real estate. So then the person at SoftBank who did that had to keep giving them money or recognize they did an error. And there's a lot of human fallibility even in venture capital where egos come into play a whole lot and people don't want to admit that they're wrong. And sometimes they think they're throwing good money after bad. But obviously he was very convincing, had probably a very good plan for expansion, but was also doing sketchy self-dealing. But all that, so be ethical in what you do. It's a lot easier. Or sell out and move to somewhere with a non-extradition treaty. But, it's easier to just be above board. The number of people who can get away with that, it is an anomaly. Like, when you're going through due diligence and whatnot, you're going to get that. Also, the SoftBank fund was not as technology focused, but there's always going to be those outliers. There's always going to be those people who got a better deal than you did. One of the things I've had to get used to is that people I don't like just becoming way more successful than I. People I think are scammers making million out of cryptocurrency and things like it happens. But it's the outlier, not the norm.
Thank you again for such a good presentation.
Oh, thank you.
My question is, what do you think is the biggest, the biggest opportunity cost if I fail a startup? I ask because I'm in my master's, and I actually worked for quite a few years after I graduated undergrad. Mm-hmm. So I'm probably older than lots of people in this room. So I think I'm probably more risk adverse than lots of younger people. So any advice for this audience group?
A lot of it's all in your head, or on the phone with your parents. Let's be honest. My mom was so happy when I went to go do my one co-op term at Google. I would not wanted to be one of her friends at that point. I did it back in 2005 when that was really hard to get. And then I went to go work for some little startups and she hated that. So a lot of that's just in your head. We have this idea that I have to do certain things by 30, certain things by 35. And one of the things you're going to learn when you graduate is that life does not have this nice, neat, linear trajectory. And because I know working at a FANG company or a big company sounds really good because that's the next thing. I got really good high school scores. I got into Waterloo Computer Science. What's the next A-level thing to do? Go work at a FANG company. Ask anyone who got laid off from that last week how that linear life progression goes. So I mean, you're still I hate to say it, you're still young. It's not that big a deal because your careers you're going to work for 30, 35 years. What's a few years at the beginning? So that's why I would say I was 31 when later started. And at that point, that was rough because I had a few not successful ones. All my friends are I was getting pretty deep in my 30s by the time I was actually contributing to RRSPs. But I enjoyed it. Live in the moment. Not every, it's not some game. It also helps if you have friends who aren't techies for a couple of reasons. Please have friends who are nowhere near tech for a couple of reasons. They don't care because if you have a 400K total comp working for FANG and you're complaining about anything to them, they don't care about your problems. But also those are your people who know what normal people do. Tech people tend to be early adopters of things, and having normal people you can bounce ideas off of are good. But it sucks because you feel like you need that, but that pressure is all in your head.
Sorry, my question may be a little harsh, but I think your slide about the ideas about the startups, which one
The shitty startup idea list?
Yeah, that one. Yeah. So it's a little confusing for me, personally, because at least I know a couple of them in every category that you mentioned. For example, the student one, there's QPay. I think they have highest valuation in the history of Shark Tank, which is specifically targeted for students. There is at least in Waterloo, I think the most successful startups in the history of Waterloo are Ethereum, Optimism, Axelar, all of them are unicorns. Also Applyboard targeted students again. Mm-hmm. I think these are the most successful startups in Waterloo.
But here's my point. I'll let you finish.
Yeah, and there's other all other ideas too. Specifically about restaurants. There's at least a couple of really successful startups in Canada. I think the biggest startups maybe. But in the other hand, there's really interesting hype or pull of ideas about using ChatGPT, AI on every other way that you can imagine. And this is like getting very confusing for me because there is always like some kind of like vibes about like, so for example, like 5 years ago, there were like 5G, IoT, millions of people made tons of money out of that. Like 2 years ago, like crypto, right now, like
Crypto, currency.
yeah, cryptocurrency and like,
We're in Professor Stabila's presence here. We are going to say cryptocurrencies.
and now like there is like OpenGPT and this stuff.
Yeah, okay.
So this is like, how do you see like this space of ideas? There is one, like, because every couple years there will be like some hype, and there will be like at least like 100K of people working on OpenGPT in the next 2 years.
Gotcha, okay.
So maybe this is not the best way looking forward. Like,
So the first thing, I'm going to qualify everything I said. Any piece of advice I gave here, you could probably be successful ignoring it, any singular one. The people, like, we give kind of best practices, but I guarantee you every company is violating some piece of advice that I said. Because this is more of an art than a hard science, they're just best practices. And keep in mind, venture capitalists, who are essentially the best at doing this, still strike out more times than they hit. In terms of the ones that I put, all those, there will always be successful things in all of those ones. Like Ethereum, I mean, the founder went here. They're great products, but I think a lot of them get overhyped. And you've seen that bubble there. You also have to think about, like, what was a startup that worked? You're also seeing a very strong, in those ones you say, survivor bias. Because those are ones that made it in those things. What I'm saying is that in terms of the ideas I see from students, I see way more that are two-sided marketplaces. Those are hard to get going. Tools are like such an easy way to get started because everyone loves tools. If people are paying you for some tool they make, I've just seen a lot of startups that try and create two-sided marketplaces. They have a higher failure rate than other ones. With cryptocurrencies, for that one, like, would you want to start one now? Everything's pivoting to AI. You're right, there is an AI hype cycle right now. The fundamental difference, though, is that with Web3, we were kind of contriving use cases, and we were trying to, like, oh, you can use this for land deeds, what have you. Whereas with something like AI, we're exploring the use cases. We're seeing, like, okay, what can this do? You can get ChatGPT or go to the playground and, like, see, well, what can this do? What can I move? You know, you're not going to create a startup only on that, but there is just a certain availability that happened there. A thing I'm always cognizant of is that as you get older, you start to hate newer things. And I'm trying to avoid being that because I was like meh on VR, meh on Web3, and I'm like, do I just hate everything new? Because I mean, it's not just because, like, you know, I turned 35 and then anything new must be stopped. So that is always in the back of my head. But what it comes down to, like Ethereum, yeah, incredibly successful. What's that SBF? Was pretty successful up until recently. So, you know, if you really want to do a Web3 startup, you can go ahead. But, you know, if you're forcing a use case on it, you're going to have trouble. If you were creating a Web3 startup back in like 2017, 2018, and you were in place for that boom, you're going to be way better off. But now that has kind of gone past. There's going to be a lot of AI companies right now, and a lot of them aren't going to make it, but there is opportunity there. Because there's just new things that are...
but like if the goal is just making a huge, like, successful business, I don't see the fundamental difference between something like, because to me, like OpenAI and these toolings are mostly in the space of entertainment, right? Like you can just, I don't know, like make random pictures and this kind of stuff. I've rarely seen any like significant, like, I don't know, machine learning thing in the I don't know, like in Google, even like maybe you can see some stuff, but like in most of these startups, you can see that it's going like downwards.
So this is hitting a...
I think it's somehow the same case for most of the new technologies. You can see that there's, I don't know, like 99% is just hype and it's going down, but like some part of the crypto space is also revolutionizing everything. And I'm not necessarily mentioning that one. Like there's all of those categories.
Oh yeah, so there's always going to be hype cycles. Some of them are going to work, some of them are going to go nowhere. I was giving GPT as an example of like what wasn't capable 18 months ago. But one of the things is when the iPhone came out, and I was your age when that happened, people's first thought wasn't, oh my gosh, this is going to kill the taxi industry. They were like, cool, it's an iPod that's also a phone. So what these technologies are going to do is they're going to allow creative people to expand them. But I'm just saying Web3's had a few years now, and aside from like it's pump and dumps, that's the biggest one. But like I said, there's other opportunities, and maybe GPT and large language models won't go anywhere. But I mean, having played with it, I can see how it will. That's just one example I was going to give. There's a world full of opportunity out there. I just find new and student entrepreneurs over-index on those things that I have. Also, full disclosure, entrepreneurs, we tend to over-index on our failures. And you're going to get venture capitalists who are like, oh, I'll never do a blank again, but they're over-learning, speaking of machine learning, they're over-learning a bad trait than what it actually is.
Ian, if I could pivot just for 1 second to some of the questions that were asked before. Quite a few people were interested in potential emotional and mental barriers that you may have faced, and if there were any particular stress points, how did you mitigate that to ultimately continue on that journey?
That is an ongoing. Founder mental health, it takes a lot. You have to really dissociate yourself from the company, because even now, after I've exited, I'm still like, what if this collapses tomorrow? And it could. And the only thing I can really say is that I still get imposter syndrome. There's like certain people, if they said, you did this, this, and this, you're one big fraud, I'd be like, you got me, I'm good. I just sold the company, it's all good. No, I'm fine. You're always going to feel like that. And I've had to tell a lot of even our leaders that, this is getting used to imposter syndrome. I can't do this. Everyone should have that doubt. Because if every entrepreneur would be lying if they said they didn't have any doubt, they were sure the whole wave, and it was just this smooth ride up and to the right. How do I get exercise? Having friends who are nowhere near tech or the startup industry, very important. Have your support group. Those are all very important things whenever you're going through this. I hate to say, I did it pretty good. I always embrace the chaos. A founder has to have a certain, I think a lot of employees want, and I've noticed this, it is a fundamental thing whenever I talk to my employees versus like co-founders, is employees want certainty. They want to know the next quarter is going to be better. I have, my job, certain level of job security. We want to know what the company plan is. Founders tend to be a little more embracing of the chaos, where I don't know what 2023 is going to like. We just went through a whole planning cycle. In the back of my head, I'm like, this all feels like bullshit and fiction. It's not. You have to have this for investors and whatnot, but embrace the chaos.
I have one question. It's about co-founders.
Yeah.
So, like, I tried for the last 3 years several times to find a suitable co-founder, but the thing is, initially they show great like enthusiasm, excitement, and all that, and after a few months it fades away. Do you have any advice on that, like how to find or how to keep them interested?
Traction. People are motivated to work on things that are starting to move forward. Whenever you hear the stories of like entrepreneurs working 80 hours a week or whatever, it's not because I had to, there was someone gun to my head. I wanted to. When I was working those 80-hour weeks, that was me. My desire to work exceeded my physical capacity to. And part of that was that we had traction. Like, I have customers. I felt like I was going to be letting them down if there was an error and where we didn't get this feature out. So you just know when you hear those horror stories, people voluntarily do that. But it happens when your product is gaining traction. So the first thing I would probably ask is like, is it feel like it's going anywhere? If not, people are just feeling, and one of the hardest things you'll do as an entrepreneur is know, this isn't going well, we should stop and do something else, versus this isn't going well, we should pivot to something else, make a small change, and hopefully get it going. But I promise you, if you see metrics going up and to the right, you will be motivated to keep people around. In terms of how I found my co-founders, my first co-founder, I actually went to like a co-founder speed dating event, which is interesting, because it was basically a lot of non-technical people trying to find technical people. Anyone know the movie, The Social Network? Came out in like 2010. Great movie. After that movie came out, it was the freaking worst being in technology, because I got so many like people, like all my friends from high school were like, hey, I've got an app idea. Hey, I've got an app, because everyone saw that movie, and I thought it was that simple. I was trying to avoid all of that, but I went to a co-founder speed dating one. My first co-founder, he didn't go to that, but he looked at the list of people who he did, and then he plucked me out of there. But he was like a credible co-founder. Like he had worked at McKinsey, the Boston Consulting Group, and INSEAD, like his MBA there. Like it was very credible, but we also made a product that didn't go anywhere. My second co-founder, who was Roger, the one who's, we've now been with like 2 companies together. I call him my corporate life partner. And if you find someone you click with and you just want to keep making companies with that person. I wish I had some formula to tell you, but it's like applying a formula to dating. It's just, you have a sales funnel, you try, some people don't work out, you do what you can. You just meet as many people as you possibly can, but getting traction does keep people interested and motivated.
Hi. So my question is sort of related to something you just mentioned like 2 minutes ago. Do you have any advice on knowing like when you need to stop? Like if you feel like it's not going well, when do you stop, or when do you like turn to a new idea, or you just keep going? Like how do you know to do that? When
you have product traction, you'll know it. You just see the stats, you see people talking. It's the best feeling in the world. The opposite is when you try new things, you get no reaction. For me, the first company, there was an Amazon Web Services had an outage for a day or something, and our stuff was down, and no one cared. We didn't get a single email about it. That sucked. For that first company, it just came down to we ran out of money. We went to an accelerator. We had a little bit of cash. It ran out. And there was no hope of it. The one thing about raising money, it does kind of give you a timeline to show progress by. Another thing, if you raise a seed round and it doesn't go anywhere, it will shock you how much they don't care. When my first company went under, like I remember when I was, had my dad's car and I like put $200 worth of damage on his car. I thought he was going to murder me. Oh my gosh, I spent $200,000 of these people's money. They were just like, oh, that sucks. What are you going to do next? So the failure is not that, again, most of the failure is in your head. But in terms of when you kind of have a feeling, you get the founders are looking for other jobs, you just kind of know. But pivoting is something you have to get used to. Like if you are talking to a lot of customers and they're all saying something similar, we don't like your initial idea, but this is close to it, you just have to get used to talking to people. And this is kind of where it goes with like the user research, product management, which is why I say like if you do take one thing from this, go to Udemy, take a product management class. There's great ones that are offered for like $20. Get your parents to pay for it because I know none of you do. But yeah, there's no great set way other than running out of money. But because the nice thing about being your own technical co-founder is that your sweat equity is all that matters. You can keep working on it forever. But if you're not seeing movement in some metrics, and the product management course will tell you what metrics to look for, then you'll kind of know.
My question is related to your, like somebody who starts a company, they obviously have a drive, right? So is it okay to be driven solely by money?
I would say most are by money. It's not like if you want the honest truth. Like ultimately, I didn't go work at a FANG company, so I expect like a risk-adjusted return for that time I would have been at there. But I mean, it's more to it than just that. If you are mercilessly just want to make as much money as possible, go on to Wall Street. That's the easiest way. But like, there is an element of like you can have that, and trust me, exits are nice. Being able to afford property in Vancouver is super nice. Being able to finance this math entrepreneurship fund is really awesome. But money doesn't buy you happiness, but I don't think everyone's going to get that until it happens. But for me, it was always just I wanted to be able to have an outsized impact on whatever I did. That was kind of my motivation, and I was willing to work for half what I normally would all through my 20s and 30s to get there. But yeah, like everyone would be lying if they didn't have some kind of like interest in the financial incentive. Because if people were being honest, they would set up nonprofits. Like you can set up a nonprofit and put just as much effort into that as you can a for-profit startup. So, but the thing is, find a problem that you're passionate about. That matters way more than whatever else is motivating you. And you'd be surprised what problems you can get motivated about once you're exposed to them. Again, social media management was not how I imagined spending my life, but here we are. And it's fun. You get a lot of, you can find interest in a whole bunch of things.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Earlier you talked about being funded by VCs.
Yeah.
Taking that route, eventually there's an exit in the future.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about your observation of different founders in like their journey in building their companies, like how different exit strategies that you have observed.
So there's kind of 3 big exit strategies. 1, the company goes nowhere and you fold. It happens, that's an exit strategy. It sucks, but it's the big one. And I think a lot of founders, when they fail, they feel like everyone's going to judge them. Most people aren't even going to know. Like the day I decided my first startup we're done with, if I didn't post a note about that, no one would have known. I was just looking for a job. People kind of get it. The happiest one is where you go public, through an IPO. That's a huge amount of effort. You have to be a multi-billion-dollar company for that to happen. Far more frequently, you get acquired by another company. Or in our case, get acquired by a private equity firm, merge with Mavrck, but then the headlines all say acquired by Mavrck, and you're like, well, that's just too complicated to know. Acquisitions, there's a massive spectrum in those because there's certain things like an acqui-hire where they're just acquiring you for your team. They're probably not paying too much. They don't care about your product. Sometimes they're acquiring you for your product, in which case you get a little more out of it. Where you start to do really well is when they're acquiring you for your customers. That's when you start to really get some serious return for your investors. If you do take VC, the nice thing is they are very incentivized to help you make that decision. But for us, companies aren't really bought so much as they're sold. Like for us, it was, okay, we're done. We're ready to give our investors a return. We start shopping it around with, hey, who's interested in buying us? Selling a company is like the worst parts of dating and home buying put together because there's a lot of ghosting and comparing offers from people. It's just all the worst of that together. And then you go through due diligence, which is this process where every sin your company has committed gets brought to light. Because if they're spending a lot of money, they're going to want to know what they're getting. I could give a long talk all about due diligence, but the bigger you're selling for, the more due diligence they're going to have to make sure your company does all the things that they should have done with WeWork. In terms of people I know one person who went public. Going public is for a very specific type of founder because you're now a publicly traded company and there's just a whole different level of compliance that comes with that. Now, a lot of people who sold companies, they tend to go work for the employer for about 2 years, move on, depending on the terms. I sold about a year ago, so you can tell how much more I have. I'll probably be hanging around. But yeah, within that space, there's a whole lot. And sometimes people get acquired and it's somewhat predatory. Where they know you're running out of money and you have to sell, so they're giving you a lowball offer. And there's people who deal with that, buy and sell companies. That's a huge, massive financial industry. So again, I could give a long talk about even just how you get acquired, but not all acquisitions are good acquisitions because sometimes you see companies getting acquired for less money than they raised. That's probably what's called a distressed acquisition, and founders tend not to do as well because usually investors get depending on how you took investment and what the deals are there, you might not get as much out of it.
You spoke about how culture is so important and it's important to implement it with your starting or with your founding team. What are some other processes you wish you implemented early on with Later.com?
Ooh. I think we waited way too long to get an HR department because helping with recruiting and just managing how day-to-day, once you start hiring people, you don't, your first hire should not be an HR person, but it shouldn't be your 100th either, so figuring out where to do that one. One of my biggest regrets though is not going full-time on it sooner. Part of it is that because we started later and it was a side project, and we had another company we were working on. To your question about when to know when to fail, it was well, we also had another project that was going faster, so we wanted to join that one. I wish we had gone full-time sooner and maybe taken what money we'd take sooner just so we could ramp it up. I do wish we had sorted out our founder roles a little more closely because we had some overlap. There were some questions about who was going to be CEO. I didn't want it, but the other people were we waited way too long to sort that out. So if you try and raise money, they're going to ask who is in charge, and they want one name. And if you don't have that, you're going to have to sort that out eventually. In terms of culture, I think that was one thing we nailed. We did pretty well early on. Those are kind of the broad ones that are kind of general. In terms of I have so many product things. I wish I would do but little things. I wish we used linting in our CI early on. It's just these little things. I wish we had security scanning early on. We had taken security, but these are it gets pretty technical when I think about what I would have done earlier. Also, what to name things, because if you set up an API endpoint for someone that has a mobile app, you don't get to change that name ever. So there's some we renamed some things when marketing got involved, so the API doesn't really reflect it. They're very tactical like that in terms of what I think about. Me personally? I mean, if you have traction, it's literally, I have actually not started angel investing. I know that's on my to-do for this year. If you have traction, again, they will come to you. It's kind of shocking. If you have a proper LinkedIn setup, you have product hunt set up, you have angel list set up, you will do that. That's where accelerators are great. If you have no network, accelerators are a great place to start that. I guess I put it when the networking question came up, accelerators are kind of how I met everyone in the Vancouver tech scene, along with hackathons. Those are and you have Hack the North here. You guys get to go to Hack the North. Hackathons were not a thing when I was an undergrad, and I really wish they were. But the North America's largest hackathon, you get to just go to here and meet other people. If you talk to an investor and say, hey, everything with traction, that's how you get it. But you just have to sometimes reach out, sometimes they come to you. But this is where accelerators are so good. They will introduce you because they establish them. Getting that ball started is hard, but once you kind of know your network and you start being 2 degrees separated from someone, it really helps. But that's how I'd say how we got that. Also, just going down to Silicon Valley, we sent our CEO down to Silicon Valley for a month to go raise, and that's just what he did. He lived on couches while he was talking to investors, and it's quite common as a Canadian company to go down there and raise money. US investors are very comfortable writing checks to Canadian companies now. Canadian VCs and angels, there's not that many. And what I usually tell founders is that if you're good enough to get money from a Canadian VCs, you're good enough to get a better deal from American ones. Because a lot of US Canadian ones are somewhat conservative in their outlook. You get a lot of former bankers, not a lot of people with operational experience. But that's fine. We only had one Canadian on our cap table. Sorry, cap table is your list of investors and how much they have. You can just go down to the US too, but that's where you have the C100. If this is your problem, there are many solutions. If you have a product with traction, it's just easier because just send them, if I had to cold outreach to an investor, just send them a graph of your traction. You're way more likely to get that response than a pitch of we're going to revolutionize whatever industry. The truth is sometimes apolitical. If you show them something growing and they do have, you also have to imagine things from the investor point of view. They worry about something called deal flow, which is, I have this pot of money I have to give out. I have to find companies to invest in. They have to kind of be a little bit of a hunter finding them. And none of them want to pass on the next Google. So if you show them up and to the right in a market that's pretty big, you can get that. Yeah, talk to Velocity and hope you added me on LinkedIn. Happy to talk.
Hey,
Hi.
so Hootsuite started in 2008 and later started in 2014.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the owl, are we?
Yes, I'm curious
Let's
how.
talk about the owl. Okay.
I'm curious how your strategy was when you're initially starting. How were you competing against Hootsuite and differentiating yourself?
Yeah. Okay. So this is somewhat hilarious that 2 of the best-known social media management platforms are both made in Vancouver. Yeah, Hootsuite was there before. They had no Instagram support when we started. The contrarian opinion, so the first version of our software did not actually automatically publish to Instagram. What we had is I heard a bunch of people having this problem of how do I get, at the time, one of our co-founders was hooking up with a brand manager from Brandy Melville, and when we were talking to her, she was like, oh, again, you get exposed to these problems you wouldn't otherwise have. And she was saying how, hey, we're posting, this is 2013, so Instagram's how millennials are shopping nowadays. We have to get so much content out, it's hard. And I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, there's no API for publishing at the time. But what would be the next best thing? And it would be a push notification sent to your phone, which you open with an in-app hook, there to go. So you still have to approve to publish, but that's fundamentally how Later started. It was a hack solution to a problem that was just starting to grow, and as Instagram grew, we went with it. Our kind of contrarian opinion was that it doesn't have to be automatic. It's okay to just manually publish it. It meant for a weird UX because we had to educate users hey, this isn't automatically going to publish. But Hootsuite didn't do that at the time. Then they went, yoink, I like that idea. I'm just going to integrate that into our product. And they did that in 2015. And that sucked. When you just see your largest competitor in the space just take your idea and go, yoink, with a casual disregard for any intellectual property. You're going to learn that patents are defensive, not offensive. by which you use your patents to protect against litigation coming at you, not to other people. Also, software patents have their own thing. And here's what happened. We had flat growth for 2 months, and then it was fine. Competition probably doesn't matter as much as you think it is. And honestly, I don't think about Hootsuite as a competitor that much anymore, because they started moving into the enterprise space where we were going more small and medium business. The worst thing that happened, I remember that day very clearly when they announced that, and it sucked, but then I wish I could tell myself, it's not going to matter. They're going after a different, sure they took your idea, but we're still known for Instagram. And they were more tethered to Twitter. So as more people were into the visual media, we were just better situated for it. And we just made a better product, and we were iterating faster than they were for a lot of things. And we were more focused on a smaller segment, and they kept charging more and more, and we were just sticking with the small and medium businesses. Like a standard later user is a solopreneur running some kind of a business. They don't have a lot of time to do this Instagram thing, but they know they need to. Hootsuite is a more fleshed out solution. Like a lot of these, very few verticals only have one player in them. They have to be competitive. If you tell an investor, we have no competition, they will be like, liar, or you have no competition for a reason because it's a bad market. So it happened. It just sucked because they were in town. And I knew half the Vancouver tech industry had worked there at some point. And they're like, oh, so you're kind of like Hootsuite is a thing I've had to hear so many times. That's why I just call them the owl. But I mean, they're a good company, sort of. They're the okayest of all the social media management tools out there.
Okay, we'll take one more question here before we transition to our networking and refreshments.
I had a question. I was wondering, do you have any advice for anyone that's interested in joining a startup? Like what to look for to gain experience in terms of a startup for potentially later on founding a startup? So maybe a stage, industry, any advice that you have there?
Look at the founder. It's very top down. If the founder set the tone for the culture. So if the founder's an asshole, it's not going to be pleasant to work there. Especially look for people who've done it before, whether they work with, there's this weird thing where to be a founder, you have to have a certain level of ego, but you also have to treat people well underneath. It's a tough balance, but it's still a business. I worked at a startup. When I moved to Vancouver, it was to work for this greenwashing company because eco-tech was all the rage back then. But the founder really had no business making a tech startup. He was very authoritarian in how he did things, and that doesn't work. With thought workers, we're not cogs. You have to understand who gets that. Having someone with a technical background really helps because Vancouver also especially has a lot of founders who they hired their first tech person, they outsourced the creation of their app. They're never going to get and appreciate product the same way. So the one caveat is that not a lot prepares you for being a founder except for being a founder. The one nice thing about working on a startup is that it got me a lot closer to developing that product, but there are other ways of doing that. Honestly, working at a design shop or that's something that's making apps for clients all the time, that's also another way of doing it. So don't think that's the only path. It's a good one, but again, to my point, try and have a bad boss, or you can just YOLO it and be like whatever startup. And if for a co-op term, if I have a bad boss, so be it. That's a good lesson learned. But just find something where you get to work on the product. You have some kind of a connection to when there's a problem with it, it's coming to you. You get that at a smaller place where it's not just coming to you as a ticket. It's it's a lot more motivating when Stephanie, the support person, is yelling at you that she's things are on fire, you need to fix it. It's a lot more. You feel a lot closer than if Stephanie talks to a product manager who makes a ticket who then does this. So I'm sure there's good ones and I'm sure there's bad ones. There's probably going to be more bad ones than there are good ones because again, if you go early stage, things haven't had a chance to die out yet to the point of survivor bias.
Ian, thank you so much. On behalf of the Faculty of Math, I want to say we just so greatly appreciate you sharing your insights with us. And you had alluded to the Math Entrepreneurship Fund. I'm not sure if everybody here knows, but Ian has so generously seeded a fund to help us have events like this to support students. Yeah, and so, we're in early stages of planning, but if you would like more information, you should follow us, Math Innovation, we're still working on our socials, but we do have a website. Feel free to email us at mathinnovation@uwaterloo.ca, and we'd be happy to add you to our email list to be the first to know about more events. And here's just a small token of our appreciation. And I hope you all join us for refreshments and continue that conversation.
Oh yeah, and by the way, if you do have an exit, these people will know. They will. Lauren is going to hit you up, and it's okay. It's all good.